In the previous video about the Z400 series desktop, I showed this image of the remaining computers I had left, from back when my middle school let me take whatever I wanted from their e-waste pile. Once I was done with that video, it made me realize these 3 Z-Select ES desktops have not been checked and powered on for quite some time. So here they are, being unearthed from storage. This time for some life-extending measures to be taken. Everything still looks well enough on the outside, but inside is definitely going to be a different story. Once free of the plastic wrap, I only wanted to briefly look inside each case, verify what all is there, and see if anything catastrophic may have happened to the motherboards. I've had my collection in mostly dry and cool environments between moves, so if anything were to happen, it would be from things like nickel-cadmium batteries. These computers are from Zenith Data Systems, but given how intertwined ZDS and Packard Bell became under the parent company Group Bull, these are essentially rebranded Packard Bell desktops. This can be seen with the branding of the white desktop's power supply, saying it is from Packard Bell, while the same components are on the other two. Branding's definitely weird sometimes. While we are here, check out the near-mint 10-inch Zenith CRT camping out. This came with the Z400 desktop when I got it, still works, and is waiting for a proper collection display room to move into. Hopefully one day soon. I also took this opportunity to raid my parts bins for a few things to use in an upcoming mod. Everyone has got to have a junk drawer, and I happen to have several. Most of this stuff comes from scrapped desktops and still proves to be useful for projects. So, remember mentioning nickel batteries? Those amazing little battery packs that can corrode motherboards into dust? Yes, these systems were built no differently than many others back in these days. I will admit I definitely messed up by leaving these attached for so many years. Rule number 1 is to eliminate these soldered on nightmares. And while these infamous Varta barrel batteries certainly had a lot of time to destroy whatever they could, I got very lucky with how minimal this spread is. If these were nickel cadmium instead of metal hydride, this may have turned out much worse. Also, very nice patch wire on the back of the board. This is factory, by the way. All 3 have this. With that testament to my unforgivable lack of care to these boards, it was time to disassemble the other 2 desktops and get ready to remove these green plagues. Teardown is very straightforward on these models. Desktops 2 and 3 have batteries in way better condition than the first, so this was a great sign. Desktop 3 is a slightly newer model and runs a 33 MHz 486DX, while the twin models are running 25 MHz 486SX processors. All 3 have 16 MB of RAM. To begin the Varta-ectomy, I cleaned off the nasty corrosion with 99% isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush. Not really required, but it makes for a cleaner removal. After that, I propped up each board on edge, warmed up the soldering iron, tinned the tip, and attacked. By the way, hard drive magnets and an old metal side panel are great for propping up a motherboard for soldering. Gotta use what you have. Next process was final cleanup. Each board got a local soak in vinegar to neutralize any acids left, a scrub, then final cleaning with alcohol. Desktop 1 took a couple of passes and extra checks, but it actually came out just fine. To make sure nothing was hiding under any of the chips, after the alcohol I hit the affected areas with an air compressor. If any vinegar remained, I cleaned with alcohol again and blasted dry once more. A brief test of each power supply sounded like a good idea. No use in going through this trouble with the motherboards if they get fried after rebuilding. Spoiler alert, all 3 were fine. I then decided to remove the Packard Bell branded unit so testing could be done on the boards before reinstallation. I must have done something right, as every board powered on just fine. Now to do something not so right, and very hacky. Using a spare double-ended 4-pin header connector, a CR2032 lithium button cell, and electrical tape, I set out to make a temporary battery pack. After researching some ancient documentation on a similar Packard Bell branded motherboard and looking over the board itself, I found that these do come with the option and header for an external battery. Not only that, it is suited for non-rechargeable lithium batteries, which is perfect if you have a ton of CR2032s. The original battery was 3.6 volt, but many of these 486 systems keep BIOS settings just fine with the 3 volts these button cells put out. The documentation also said to pull a jumper to switch to external battery, but after experimenting I found it really made no difference, perhaps due to the soldered battery being completely removed from the circuit. During testing I came across a limitation of this BIOS. Evidently it was never updated to handle Y2K related issues. I kept thinking I had the polarity or the external battery jumper wrong, or maybe something else was happening. Every time I set the year to 2000 or above, the BIOS would reset to defaults and go right back to January 1st, 1993. Eventually, I settled on 1999 with a reset clock to conduct the battery test. After sitting for a day unplugged from the wall and on the button cell, these settings remained intact. I get to building the rest of the batteries later. Desktop 1 had some random corrosion spread around the inside of the case, as well as some random parts of spiders. Gross. So I wiped it down and reinstalled the components. Power on shows this thing has been unfazed by time. This is the original install of Windows 3.1 for my school. All we got was Word 6.0 on many of these computers. Desktop 2 was much cleaner, so in everything goes. I had forgotten I put Windows 95 on this at some point, and it was a painful experience. Still is, considering something has gone wrong with this install. No matter, that will be fixed later. Desktop 3 was also in pretty good shape inside, although you may have noticed it was missing the hard drive. That was hiding in another box, and I somehow remembered where it was and found it still attached to its caddy mount. Everything checked out with number 3 just as well as the second one. With the makeshift battery test working out, I then set out to create the also makeshift final battery packs. Since the long test wire was double-ended with 4-pin connectors, I reconnected the pins into the block on this side and cut the wire in half. With this particular setup, the black wire is not needed for these two. I also had a PC speaker with a super long wire and a 4-pin connector, so I cut that in half as well to use the connector side. I can always rewire the speaker side for use if needed in some other project. I then slid on some heat shrink tubes. This wasn't really needed, but they do make plugging these into the headers a lot easier while keeping the wires from crimping at the connector. After marking polarity, they were blasted with a heat gun. For the battery side, I coiled the stripped wire ends onto a small screwdriver to create a larger contact surface that is easier to work with when connecting it to the batteries. I then attached the ends to their respective sides of the batteries with polyamide tape. To finish them off, I also wrapped them with electrical tape. Are the final results ugly? You bet. Are they better than corrosive soldered nickel batteries? Absolutely. I'm sure there are much better ways to approach making such battery packs, but I wanted to stick to using what I had. After several days of these 3 desktops being unplugged from the wall with their new batteries, and the BIOS settings being retained in each, I am all for the hack job battery replacement technique. At this point, now that the insides are all fixed up, I thought it wasn't a bad idea to clean up the outsides a little. It has probably been 20 years since these got a wipe down, and it really shows. I mostly just use a general purpose cleaner or wet disinfecting wipes, still sticking to the theme of using what I have. The plastic bezels are sorely in need of rejuvenating, and that would be great to do right now, but will have to be for another time. I have some plans for building a retro bright setup using UV lighting that will hopefully turn into reality soon. Once that is done, these bezels are certainly going to be among the very first items going in. Once the surface cleaning made these desktops shine again, relatively speaking, I then went to fix the operating system issues with number 2. As shown earlier, a broken copy of Windows 95 was on there from ages ago. It was never happy on this hardware anyway, so a format and reinstall of DOS 6.22 was in order. Then, being the only one of the 3 having an optical drive, I installed LG's Universal DOS driver. Testing it with the Windows 98 CD showed it worked perfectly. Man, Windows 98 on this would be a total disaster. Sounds kind of fun. Nah, Windows 3.11 it is. With desktop number 2, I wanted to try a web browsing experiment, so I installed a 3Com Etherlink 3 network card and Internet Explorer 5. It will always amaze me how functional these old things can still be online. It isn't a pretty experience, but if you know where to go, basic web surfing for productive or non-productive reasons can still be accomplished. IE5 is surprisingly responsive, and even managed to load a crude-looking Google image search. A couple more hardware and driver upgrades would probably make these little boxes more capable than expected for browsing. Highly outdated still, but fun. Loading up Scorched Earth presents quite an optimal experience with the 25 MHz processors desktops 1 and 2 have. As seen previously, 33 MHz was proving to be a little too fast for this game. This is actually still too fast compared to the hardware this game was made for back then. If I had a functional PC clone from the late 80s, this would be interesting to see the difference. Going into the benchmarking, things are not terribly different between these 3 as expected, or when compared to the Z433D Plus in the last video. The amount of RAM in these 3, however, does make quite a difference. So much so that I was able to get the Doom demos to load and play. It is amusing to think that back then the school district that originally ordered these shelled out for this extra memory. It wasn't required for the task these systems were purchased for, but I've certainly never complained about it since picking them up. With this past future-proofing measure, number 3 even managed to load up the basic Quake demo. As it states in the results, Topbench failed to load for some reason on this one, and I have no idea why. Feel free to leave a guess in the comments. If you're wondering why I didn't install sound cards or network cards in all 3, the answer is an easy one to guess. Even though it would be great to fully outfit every computer I get my hands on, I simply don't have enough ISA cards to do that. Most of what I have hoarded away are of the PCI, AGP, and PCIe variety. I remain on the hunt for these things and many, many others. Anyway, with the work done in this video, this vintage hardware can continue moving forward into the future with little issue. And that about wraps things up. Thanks for watching.